Welcome. I'm Dr. Bart Rademacher, Prescription for Your Transformation, real people, real conversations, and real success. I have a very privileged position on this platform where I get to interview all these amazing people. And one of the coolest things about life is how do you get to show up with adversity? We just dealt with a little bit of adversity here, the technological issues that kind of held us back from delivering a cool and seamless kind of experience. And so this interview today was really chopped up. I had a great intro that I'm definitely going to use again. But this is what it's really all about. It's the things that hold us back in life. And there's so many things out there, and the wonderful world about personal development is identifying all those things that really hold us back, disempower us or whatever. But one of the biggest ones, perhaps the hardest ones to overcome is fear. And there's such a misconception of what that is all about. And quite frankly, the ideas that people give out there are really quite superficial or superfluous and almost cliche, like, oh yeah, just going to run through your fear and that kind of stuff. And so what's wonderful about the interviewee for today and the blessing that I get to have and that I get to share is these amazing individuals that I get to meet and all these incredible things that they get to do. And what's so classically awesome of Jeff Alexander is how many people he's helped over the years. And not just, as I was mentioning earlier, just the CEOs and entrepreneurs and those go-getters and those high achievers, overcoming their fears so that they can have the magnificence of their endeavors delivered to all of us. But it's the rest of the world. And that's also what this Prescription for Your Transformation is really all about. It's talking to the rest of us that need the help as well. And so what's wonderful about Jeff has done, he's helped all sorts of people all over the world, but particularly those in need the most and oftentimes are the ones neglected. The abused women, abused men, as well as the children out there, overcoming fear. And fear, it can be such an infectious thing, can be such an intense thing that really paralyzes us in life. And so we don't get to experience the magnificence. And so I'm delighted and honored to be talking to Jeff today in regards to how to overcome fear and all the incredible stuff that you've done. Jeff, thank you so much. And hopefully this time we got the sound right.
Yep, I'm not scared that it's not going to work just fine. It'll be perfect. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for having me on.
So tell us what is this concept of fear that we just don't understand in its proper context, in its proper way, and what is it that you then do with the world as to how to overcome that? And then I want to go back into your incredible history as well.
Well, thank you. The last 40 years have been the curriculum that I call life, that, as you said so beautifully in the intro, doesn't always show up with warning. And in fact, what I've noticed, at least in my own life, is that God doesn't put a memo at the end of my bed every morning and say, here's all the unpredictable things that are going to happen today. And that being said, when I look back, if it wasn't for those unpredictable events, I wouldn't be talking to you today. In fact, probably many of the thought leaders that you interview would probably agree with that it's just how we respond to these events is everything. I usually tell my students that suffering is not caused by the events that show up in life. Suffering is caused by how we perceive those events when they come forward. And what I do today, built on the last 40 years of my life curriculum, is we have now programs that I've done since my maiden voyage into the corporate arena, actually even before that, right, to this very day, that we create programs that give people a choice in how to respond to fear. Bart, fear isn't the enemy. And when I first started to research this so many years ago, there were a lot of programs I went to. They were all didactic. They were academic. There was PowerPoints on fear. They even pass out syllabuses. Remember, we used to call those syllabuses, yep, in those days? And it was about how to master fear, how to manage fear. Like, fear was the problem. And what I have discovered is that fear is not the problem. In fact, with many of the children, and we'll talk about that later, many of the children that I have been blessed to be able to help through this voyage have some of the most beautiful definitions of fear. I was talking to a little 7-year-old in one of my classes about 20 years ago that he raised his hand. He says, I know what fear is. And I said, okay, what's fear to you? He stands up and he goes, fear is a feeling in my body that tells me about my environment so I know what choices to make. And then he sat down and I said, wait a minute, can you stand up and say it again? I want to write it down. I never heard such a non-judgmental, beautiful definition of an innocent little child to see fear as quite the difference of how I was viewing fear. There was an invitation. It was talking to us. And what I have seen over the last 40 years is that when we pick up that telephone and there's something scary on the other end, most of us, when that phone rings, don't pick it up. In fact, it's almost that we try to avoid it. Almost like life is about, let's go in the opposite direction. Yet, I don't know about you, but for me, I keep getting invited back to what I call wake-up calls, and fear tends to be the thing that grabs my attention. Fear is like a tsunami. It'll get your attention. And in fact, both in the corporate arena where I've spent the last 40 years of my life, but more in the general public and personal growth, fear seems to be misunderstood. You said it very eloquently just a little while ago. It's not, again, the feeling in the body. It's how we respond to that. And that maybe we could talk about my early days and one of the best teachers I had, which was law enforcement.
Yeah, and I think what's awesome about the work that you've done, and perhaps let's go into that right now, a little bit of background, because as you said, life happens and has you change your direction, and you actually started off in a whole completely different career path and fell into a group of individuals, the police, that actually needed your help. And clearly, police officers aren't immune to the fear. They have real life dangers ahead of them, and they have to be able to, I don't want to use the word manage, but they have to be able to be in that fear and work as effectively as possible. So share with us that brief story about you and being a dentist.
Well, it goes back into 1974. I found myself at UCLA. Life was turning out. It looked great. If I would have wrote the script, I would have wrote it exactly the way I was living. I just completed my first year of dental school at UCLA, had my little white coat on. I was going to be a doctor in 3 years. I was engaged to be married. Life was perfect. And then it happened. On my wedding day, I flew back up to Northern California, got married. My dad came out to me, gave me a hug. He was 49 years old at the time. He says, I'm so happy for you. I went to my honeymoon, and 4 hours later, I got a phone call, and he had passed away. So it was both the best and the worst day of my life. It was what I call today a wake-up call. It's not something that, again, I would have designed. But if it wasn't for that incident, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you right now. What it did, after I went through the grieving process, I never had anybody die around me. And I realized something very important. My father was going to loan me the money to get through the remaining 3 years. I had no money, completely broke. I was a custodian at night, working 40 hours a week, going to school. And I was a martial artist at the time. And one of my best friends is somebody we all know and love, Chuck Norris, before he was an actor. He helped me out considerably. He hooked me up into a boxing gym. Now, I know what you're going to think. Here's a guy going to be a dentist, is going to be helping people, a healthcare provider, and now he's going to go in and start damaging people. In fact, a lot of the radio shows I did back in those days, they called me the guy who fixes them during the day and then knocks them out at night.
Right, I was just going to say.
Yeah.
At least the teeth part.
So it was weird, but it was something that I was good at. It's something that I did. And I had no idea at the time that what traveled with me was this feeling, like my little friend said, of fear in the body. When you're in the back of a locker room and there's 5,000 people in an auditorium screaming and shouting, for two guys to go into this primitive environment and beat the living daylights out of each other, that's not something I would have designed when I applied for dental school.
Right.
But there I was. Well, what happened and how the police entered to the equation is that I was approached by a young police officer after one of my fights back then who heard me on the radio. And he said, guys are getting out of the academy, the police academy, and within 2 or 3 years, the death toll is getting really high. And he said they knew enough to know what they didn't know, which was our reaction to fear somehow is not working for us. And we need to have a supplemental curriculum to help us get through this, to help us understand. And so I did three things. I wrote with police officers in violent situations. I learned a lot. I went to prisons. I got to interview predators that caused ferocious, terrible things to people. And the third thing I did is I interviewed victims of violent abuse situations and stuff in hospitals. And I found out there was one very important thing is that everybody had a misperception about what fear was. So I started to design a program for the police officers, not knowing what I was doing. It was trial and error, but I knew one thing, because I had the ability to go to UCLA Medical Dental School during the day, put my white coat on, and study everything I could, not about teeth, but about how our nervous system and how our neuronal system works. I had the best researchers available to learn that, and then go to the ghettos where the police were and work with them and try to understand how we can shift this. What is it? Is fear the enemy? No, it's not. Like my little friend said, it's a feeling in the body. But why do we make such serious mistakes that causes death? So my first maiden voyage in front of people teaching had a severe consequence if I was not successful. You know, later on in life, when I found myself in the corporate world and I was teaching a lot of information and content and making a lot of headway, the results were, well, higher cash flow, like you said earlier, material gain, expansion, leverage, and all the things that the business world loves. This wasn't that. I was in front of an audience that if my stuff didn't work,
right,
the consequence was devastating. It was death.
right.
So we designed programs, and I knew that what needed to happen is we needed to replicate the visceral feeling of fear in the teaching. And this is what was different, because the police, they learned about fear didactically. It's like trying to learn how to ski, but never touching the snow. So they learned about it mentally, but when they hit the streets and they felt bullets whizzing go by their heads, and they felt the visceral feeling in the chest, in the stomach, in the limbs, they tried to resort back to what they learned mentally, and it didn't work. Because this is what happened for all of us, not just the police. They immediately would fall back into this default programming that all of us got in before we were 7 years old. And that's like throwing spitballs at a battleship. The subconscious mind that has all of this programming in it came in at a time when we weren't conscious, and so it all comes in. And some of that stuff is not so healthy. It's not the appropriate way. And so when I noticed this, I said, how do we go back? We can't change the reaction to fear, but maybe if we could go into the subconscious somehow and let the conscious mind be able to develop a language with the unconscious part of our body, the unconscious mind, which is huge, then maybe we can somehow upgrade the software. So I knew that fear wasn't the enemy, but fear was just misunderstood. We needed to go. So I created programs back then that were very physical, very emotional, because fear is a feeling. You don't feel fear in your head. You usually feel it in the chest, in the stomach, and then it propagates out to the limbs. And so I needed to get them back into that state. And then while they're aware of it in a safe environment, they get a chance to see the default programming. And here's the important part, and not make it wrong. Not push it away. Not work on it through processing it for the next 30, 40 years. But just embrace it and say, here's the programming. And like a computer software, when you have outdated programming, what do? You update it. You build on the existing program. And that's what I decided to do. A lot of trial and error. There was a lot of angels back there that went with me every step of the way. So I redesigned confrontations because the police were scared that if they lost their handgun, their weapon, they wouldn't know what to do. I thought I was going to teach them physical things. Now, though I did that, because I was a fighter back then, remember that, that's not what the crust of the message was. Because every time they went through this, there was this release. All the police officers wanted to do was talk and share after the experience. So we created the program, and to this day, it looks the same. It's just a different kind of program. It's not for law enforcement. We took them into a place where they were physically got to understand the true nature of confrontation. And most people have a misperception of confrontation. It literally comes from the Latin word confrontare. It means to join with that which is in front of you.
Right.
Not to push it away, but to literally invite it in. And so they got to have a physical, emotional response. They got a chance to see their programming, and then we talked about it. Now, you got to understand, being a 25-year-old kid in front of hardcore 21-year veteran cops, I was the student, really, through that time. But I got a chance to see the natural response to people when they broke through their perception to a more expanded, a more empowering notion that fear wasn't the enemy. It was a feeling that made you more aware, a heightened response, that if we could then pick new choices, we'll have new outcomes. And there's where the whole path down the power of belief, and as you know in all your interviews, how strong belief is in setting and dictating a course of action for us that most of the time we aren't even aware of. And so it was really the police officers back then that got me started. The other piece where the children came in, the doctor part of my name is for a pediatric dentist. That was my specialty. I wanted to focus on children, specifically the underprivileged families of California, the kids that were not being treated. There were kids that literally, when I first opened up my office and I treated everybody, I was told by my, quote, peers who supposedly knew a lot, I didn't know anything about business when I got out of school. I knew a lot about teeth and a lot about how to throw a left hook, and that's about it. But what I did realize was that there was a part of our community that was not being seen, and it was really difficult to turn away a 5-year-old and a single mom who can't pay her electric light bill and say, you know, when you get a better insurance plan, I'll see you.
Right.
So I was told by my peers that I'd be out of business in 3 months. Now, after going to school for 8 years, literally fighting my way through, I can literally say I fought my way through. That was scary. Again, fear raised its face again. It wasn't the fear of failing with police officers. It was the fear of losing this company that I just started and my dream. But here's the good news. What you put out, you get back. And I told my staff, literally at the time, I had 7 people. I was the only doctor in the office. I said, look, we might be closed in 3 months. So you may want at month number 2 be looking at the want ads, because I'm not sure. And I told them, I said, look, if we're closed in 3 months, God doesn't want me to be a doctor. I'm supposed to do something else. Now, it's easy to say that, but when you're in the middle of that, it's pretty scary stuff. When I was in heavy debt, and my dream was at stake. Well, we went to month number 6, month number 7. It's been, by 3 years into that, we had 7 clinics in Northern and Southern California. We're a multimillion-dollar business, and we have treated today 789,000 children who would have never been cared for in the last 40 years. So I think we're going to make it. We're going to be okay. Now, I'm going to tell you, it's been an easy road. And, you know, and I mentioned to you earlier that I just even recently went through another curriculum, bankruptcy, pulled out of it. But that was a very challenging time for me. That at a time in my life when I have white hair, and now I'm the teacher and I've got it all handled. God said, not so fast. We have another curriculum for you. So that's kind of how my start is. I really owe a lot to the police officers. They would refer to me eventually, because it worked so well with them, that we had no deaths. And for the 2 years I was working with them, they acknowledged not so much me, but the work was so profound that it bled into other areas of their life. So I'd have police officers come to me and say, I want my dad to do this program. You know, he just lost his wife through cancer, and I want him to better equip with the fear of loss. And then they'd bring children to me that were badly abused or abducted and released, that weren't winning. And so I created a program for kids that was fun, and it was great. It got us on Oprah in 1992. And so each time I was invited to go forward into that particular mindset, I just would ask for guidance, and the guidance came, and fear tended to be my companion every step of the way. And so from there, today, what we do now, we've made it, it's not about law enforcement. It's about the general public. So we have people that come in and they're in a wheelchair or they can't see. And the oldest person just went to the program last time was 84 years old. And we've been making a significant difference in a lot of lives.
Oh, that's amazing. That's absolutely wonderful. So you're still practicing as a dentist, correct?
Well, I haven't. The only teeth I touch for the last 25 years are these.
Okay.
I went to school, and then within 3 years, I was able to leverage myself, and I have 14 full-time doctors. I have a wonderful partner that bought in 1988, and she does a lot of the clinical integrity. I manage it from up here in Washington State, where I live. That's where I'm talking to you from.
Nice.
Businesses are in the Bay Area. I fly down once a month, and I show presence. Disney goes back to Disneyland, and I show presence. I have 3 clinics left. And I'm basically teaching full time now. I've never stopped doing both. But the day I opened up my dental offices, I was teaching at the same time. So
that's amazing. That's
so the business.
So let me ask you a question on fear, though, because one of the things I heard once about phobias, it's not so much the you're phobic about a certain thing. You're actually more fearful of the reaction, and it sounds like that's what you're talking about. That the real fear is, how is it that you're going to react? And so in essence, you're teaching people to have to not so much react now, but have a better response to a particular situation. But rather than just keeping it in your head, you create the environment or situational conditions, if you will, that just organically cause you to have fear, but then you have the ability to figure out a healthy, smart pathway to success. Did I get that right?
Yes, perfect. In fact, I'd like to have you come be a guest speaker at my next program, okay?
All right. You got it.
Yeah. Now, it's said so appropriately and so beautifully because, again, fear is not the enemy. It is an emotional response in our body. And what happens a lot of the times is that, I don't know if you've ever woken up in the morning and all of a sudden you just feel blue for some reason. There's this programming. It's like you look around and all the data around you seems like everything's good, everything's fine. But there's this stuff that just rises up in the body. And you said it really, really perfectly a second ago, is that the response that terrifies us, and this is where worry is born. Worry is nothing but a branch off the tree of fear, like guilt. It lives right next to the branch called guilt. But it's about the future. It's about what we create in our imagination, most of the time of events that never happen, that we put energy into, and we feel this feeling in our body. And here's the problem, Bart. The problem is this, is that there's 2 kinds of fear. And this is, I got really clear of this back when I was with the police officers. Primordial fear, which is back in the days of the saber-toothed tiger and we were running from them, is an absolute essential part of our survival. What happens is that all of a sudden we see a threat. And if there's a big animal going to eat you, you're going to have this feeling that we call fear. So what happens is that the forebrain shuts down. It goes to the rear part of the brain. All of the major organs in the body close down and sends all the energy in the blood, squeezes it to the limbs and the legs. There's the fight or flight syndrome. We've all known this. Right. And how much energy do you want at that point in time directed to the flight or fight? You want 100% of it.
Right.
Now that's fine, that's healthy. But here's the problem. The problem is this, is that when that happens, it's only supposed to go on long enough for you to finally take some form of action, and action is the key. So the 3 to 4 minutes, you finally have either fought or you've escaped, and now you're back, and then everything comes back. The immune system is now running functionally. The internal organs are maximized, and your rational thinking comes back into play. With psychological fears, where we have a problem. And that's the area that we focus on with Ignite Your Life. And we did it with the police officers, and we've done it with everybody in between. Psychological fear says, and what happens is we create these pictures in our head, and we look at, oh my, if this doesn't happen, this bad thing's going to happen. And it's not even happening, so it's in the future. Yet what happens, we have this thing called the mind that is between us and the environment. That's us and the picture. So we literally believe, and the body doesn't know the difference between a picture in your head or a real saber-toothed tiger. And so it's going to respond the same way. Problem is this, is that this is where I see a lot of people, especially with police officers and the incidents of problems and marital problems and alcohol and all this. They resort to that because they live in this constant chronic state of fear that never leaves. So you can't fix a problem that hasn't really happened yet. So it lingers. And there's where a lot of the people that come today constantly say over and over again, it seems like no matter, I have an understanding of what is going on, but still what's happening is I'm suffering. And there the suffering comes in is because of the choices they feel they can't make. And so what Ignite Your Life does, and what I endeavor to do, is give people the opportunity to make new choices. And therein you have the power, because your reality is dictated by the choices that you make, not by what the event is and how we respond to it. Hopefully that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. One thing, how I like to share that information is that the happiest people have more choices. And so it's about flexibility. And what's true about what you're talking about is that, when we realize that we have choices in our life, we also are aware of, like, let's put it simply, neural pathways in our brain that can lead us to different choices. And what you deliver then, in essence, is you're creating new neural pathways in the brain that you can get instant access to in those critical situations. And so in essence, you kind of trained yourself beforehand to do that.
Well, that's perfectly said. Yes.
And this is phenomenal stuff. And I know I could talk, with you forever, but we just have to wrap it up briefly. Yeah. The one question I have is this: is that obviously, going to your program will be absolutely beneficial. And in a moment, I'm going to ask you, where we can find you and how people can actually find you. But if somebody can't, go to the program, and in fact, I'm not suggesting that they don't, you should. What are some of the things that people can do now on their own to be able to overcome fear? What are some of the things that you might suggest? And once again, I want to emphasize, going to Jeff Alexander's program will be revolutionary and transforming for you.
Well, thank you for that. And we're trying to make it more available. And of course, somebody who lives in South Africa is going to find a tough time getting here. But, it's interesting because I just did a Facebook Live 10 minutes long about this particular topic. And I got a phone call. I got a message actually on Facebook from a lady in Ghana, in Africa, that was on her way to the bathroom to kill herself because she lost her husband and she lost her child in a car accident. She just could not cope with it. She'd been to therapy for 3 months. She understood it, but she could not live with this feeling. She listened to this 10-minute talk, and she texted me, and she's literally going to fly out to the program in September, which is so cool. Wow. I told her, you get out here, I'll give you a scholarship. But not for everybody who can do that. I'm literally right now, and I've been working, we all need teachers. I still have coaches myself. And I'm working on an online version of this that will make this available for anyone. Nice. And the experiential part of this, of course, you can't teach about fear always just online, but there's a lot of exercises and content that you could do daily because you're going to have a lot of catalysts throughout your day. The thing that I would tell people immediately, and I know this just from firsthand experience, is that when you're faced with the unknown, is that first starts to question that little voice in your head. And it's a little voice that just said, what little voice? That's the little voice I'm talking about. That little voice is basically the vocal point of the mind. And we all know that the mind is a thought-generating machine. It's constantly scanning the environment for the next threat. But that's no way to live. We are now not in the age of saber-toothed tigers. Yes, I know that sometimes we get concerned about our financial situations, our relationships, and we worry about our kids. They're here to stay, but how we respond to them is that there's no bad news. It's all going to be okay. When you find yourself, and speaking from my own personal experience, in the darkest of the dark, when I went through bankruptcy, even though we've climbed out, I thought I was at rock bottom, and then the ground opened up and I went deeper. That's when you're closest to the invitation. Fear is really an invitation to greatness.
Yeah.
And though you may feel alone, there's a light switch in that dark room. And if you just look for the light switch, that denotes taking action. And it's been said, those who seek will find. You keep going. You don't stop. When I was in the ring, I heard a voice. I got knocked down many times, but you hear this voice and says, get up. And it's not how many times you get knocked down, it's how many times you get back up. So get comfortable with the feeling of discomfort. It's here. Fear and pain is part of the program. People try to push it away either by drugging it away, by a lot of different activities, but it's really an invitation. When I was at UCLA, my last year there, I'll leave you with a story that was it was a turning point for me. I volunteered for the terminal ward. They called it a terminal ward back then, where people who had 3 to 6 months to live. And I found two guys. Bed number one, there was a guy who had pancreatic cancer, 43 years old. He had about 3 to 4 months left to live, and he was a tyrant. He would throw the bedpan across the room, and that's how he got attention from the nurses. Nobody wanted to talk to this guy. He was blaming the bad cancer. He was blaming everything. He said, I'm never going to see my kids graduate school. He was really not a fun guy to be around. Bed number 7, there was another guy I went and visited. Pancreatic cancer, 43 years old, same 3 to 6 months left to live. And this guy was reading poetry to the nurses. He was always loving and conditionally smiling. He was a joy to be around. I had a conversation with him and I said, how did you do this? He goes, it wasn't always easy. I was like that guy in bed number 1. He said, but every single day when I felt the pain and I had that thought of worry in my mind, that I'm never going to see my children, I'm never going to go all the way to the end, I had a choice to make. And the choice was, how do I want to spend this minute right now? I said, that's it? You made one choice? He goes, oh no, I had to make that choice 1,000 times a day. Yeah. And then that brain, the plasticity of the brains, start to wire new connections. Yeah. And what you don't use will atrophy. So his spiritual muscle got stronger. So remember that. You are going to be giving the resistance that literally will build that spiritual endurance to make new choices. Because I'll leave you with this. Both men were in pain, but only one of them was suffering. Yeah. Pain is an experience. Suffering is a choice.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% with you on that one.
Thank
you.
So
I just want to share with you, first of all, thank you so much. This is so insightful. The other question that we all can ask ourselves in any given moment, as we're present in that moment, is what is it that I really want, really? And it's exactly what you're talking about. And the truth is that with all the personal development out there, it's easy to get connected with the right kind of thinking, the right kind of feeling, the right kind of direction, and it's just available for us. And so when we get stuck, it's just a matter of discovering what you don't know that you don't know. That's going to make the difference.
Beautiful.
And so thank you for all the work that you do, particularly helping all these beautiful little kids and all the people that are really scared in life. So how do people find you, by the way? What's the best way?
Before I do that, I want to thank you too, because without people like you magnifying this message, we wouldn't be having this opportunity. So thank you, Bart, for doing this. You're making a big difference. How people can find me, my website, the best way. We just got the new programs put up for September. We'll be in San Diego and in Washington. Just go to www.jeffalexanderignite.com. Or you can email me at info@jeffalexanderignite.com. And I'll be happy to respond. And I'm always willing to help anybody I can to get them through this next chapter of life.
I love it. Well, thank you so much. And I'm Dr. Bart Rademacher, Prescription for Your Transformation. Real people, real conversations, real success. How to overcome your fear. And the truth is that the people that have an awesome way to help you with that is Jeff Alexander, different than anything that you've ever experienced before. And it's the one that's really going to give you the results. It's understanding, where fear comes from and how to work with it and to really live the life that you desire. Hey, Jeff, thank you so much for today. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. Appreciate you too.
All right. Thank you.